guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be interesting to say the least. It was a bunch of trying out and a big learning experience on my part because we're going to tackle something I personally have never done before, which is a cute cottage core smocked top. And the thing that I've never done before is the smocking part, which is quite a lot in this project. So this video is going to be a walkthrough through my process of actually developing the pattern, or rather the method of making this top, which I'm just going to share with you as it is because why not? It might be interesting to you guys too, to see what mistakes I made and what solutions I came up with. So without further ado, let's just jump right into the video. So the first thing that I'm actually going to show you is how I smock my pieces by myself. I found out that you can also buy already pre-smocked fabric, so if you don't want to go through the hassle of doing all of this by yourself, you can look into that and maybe buy a pre-smocked fabric. So I'm actually showing you two versions or two options that you can do. The first one is you just manually put the elastic band on your bobbin thread. This is just if your sewing machine can't really handle it doing it by the machine. You know, every sewing machine has an option to make the bobbin thread. And then there's obviously the other one at the machine. Mine can handle it, but there might be some machines that can't handle it. But you do the exact same as you would with a normal thread, just keep in mind that it's elastic, so just hold the thread when you're cutting it, otherwise it would just go all over the place. And put it in your machine and you can start smocking. I would suggest to do a lot of these to begin with because you're going to use a bunch and you don't want to switch it around all the time and redo the bobbin thread. So once you've done that, you can just simply go through the normal steps as you would when you put in your bobbin thread in, and you can place a try-out piece of your fabric that you're actually going to use for the piece itself underneath your needle and sew. And this is what it's going to do. The elastic of the bobbin thread is going to be pulled while sewing it, which means that it's going to gather the fabric with the elastic. And the usual smocked pieces that you see have multiple seams about 1 centimeter apart or something like that, with this exact technique, which is going to make the fabric ruffle up like this. So I have a lot of things to say about this. So first of all, I really like this technique for the look. It's a very trendy thing right now, and it has been before in the early 2000s. It's coming back, or already has come back, I guess, and it's very trendy, so you cannot do anything wrong with this look. And on the other hand, it's very tolerant towards size because it is such a stretchy material now. As you can see right here, I am measuring it and it measures about 18 centimeters, and when you stretch it out you measure 44 to 45 centimeters. So there's actually a shrinkage percentage of 36% in this technique. It's very tolerant towards sizes, so a very inclusive method of making clothes. And you might have already noticed that in a bunch of garments that you can buy in the store, you can actually see this smocked piece at the back so that the whole piece stretches and more sizes fit one garment. So if you can't find an elastic thread like that, you can also use elastic bands and just sew them on while stretching them, and it would do the same thing. And another thing that you have to watch out for is the upper thread tension, because you want to make it tight. You saw it right there, it's pretty loose, and just check it. It might be different from machine to machine, but just try out a piece and figure everything out with tensions and stuff like that. So I never really did a smocked piece. I had not really any clue of how to start, how to make this. So my best guess was just to use as a base a pattern that I already made. This is a pattern from my collection. It is not available on Etsy just because it's part of my collection. I'm not yet releasing those patterns, so sorry about that, but they will come at some point. I'm just cutting it out and then using the outer pieces, because there's lining and non-lining, so outer pieces and lining, to make a new pattern. And what I do with that is actually I align them at the bust line, as you can see right there. and then just tracing them out on a new piece of paper so I can completely more or less alter the patterns as I need them for a smocked piece. So this pattern used to be a corset top more or less. I'm going to put a picture here so you can see which one it is, and it's pretty low rise, and I wanted to change this because for my design it's pretty covered, let's say, and it has this ruffled up bust piece, and that I just drew on the pattern, not really taking any darts or whatever into consideration because it will be ruffled up anyways and the rest will be smocked, so those don't really matter. This whole piece was a learning experience for me, and I actually ended up putting the dart in the front, this dart that I'm drawing right here, into the pattern piece by just putting the paper together and closing the dart, which I would have not needed in the end. But you can see it right there, I basically just taped it together. So the next thought process, I guess, was to approximately measure the pieces or how much space each piece would need on a fabric. So this was 20 centimeters by 15 centimeters. Since this is the actual pattern size, which you would cut out of the already gathered piece, I thought, okay, let's just calculate how much actual fabric you need, smock this kind of fabric, and then put the pattern piece on top and cut it out. Which was fine, like it worked out, but I think this is a bit hard, and I also learned a lot from this tryout piece, so now I wouldn't do this calculation as much anymore. It helped a lot because I had some image of how big the fabric needs to be, but I would just gather a whole piece for front and back and not have any curves in it, and then just put a bust piece in the front to finish the garment, because otherwise you're going to have some seams and it's not really nice to have cut off edges for the elastic because it might just undo the whole smocked piece and stuff like that. So there are a few things, a few takeaways that I have from this tryout piece, which I'm going to talk about throughout this video. One takeaway, for example, you can see right here, I'm actually doing a mistake, which is that I am calculating the horizontal and also the vertical measurement of my previously approximately measured pieces. You only have to calculate the horizontal, so the width of the pieces, because you're not putting any elasticity into the height of the pieces. They're going to stay the same. You just sew horizontally, and only that gets gathered up. So I ended up smocking a whole lot, and it didn't really work out as planned. For some reason it ended up being too big, so my percentage was off a tiny bit, and I put the whole pieces together, put the bust pieces into the garment and tried it on, and there are a few things that I would like to change. So the first thing that I actually want to change is my approach in general, and I'm gonna say something about that and the easiest way of making this top to begin with in just a second. But one thing that really bothered me is that the back was not wide enough, so the side seam went straight to the back, and that really didn't look good, especially with the bust piece, which was also too narrow. So I would like to widen that piece as well so that it sits higher up on the bust. Also, because the fabric was kind of see-through, I want to make it out of 2 layers so that it is completely covering everything. So the first thing that I did to change everything accordingly was to put the side seam more towards the front, especially in my bust piece. That's where I needed this line because it went too much to the back, and the piece that I want to put into the side there is not going to be gathered in the end. So that's one thing that I did. The easiest way of actually making a top like this, I'm going to tell you right now. So you measure your underbust circumference, and then also the width from side seam to side seam. The easiest way, I guess, is if you can just put on a simple top and try to measure yourself wearing that, or also if you have one, just put it on a dress form and measure everything there. You want to measure your side seam, the height of the center front, the distance between the straps and the side seam, and the distance between both straps. Those are all the measurements that you need. So once you've taken all of your measurements, the easiest way I found after doing a whole bunch of calculating and figuring out that my approach was way too complicated for a simple top like that, you just need to take your underbust measurement, which is basically your whole horizontal measurement for your upper body in this case, as you're going to work with elastic fabric, or soon to be elastic fabric. You take your underbust measurement and you just multiply it by 2 and cut out a rectangle that measures that number times your side seam that you measured before. So the height of your top that it should end up being. And that was in my case around 75 centimeters times 22 centimeters or something like that. And I found actually finishing the edges before you smock is way easier. Probably you already thought that. Obviously it's way easier. So I actually just folded it twice by 5 millimeters and stitched over it with the normal thread before smocking it, and then just closely used the elastic thread on the finished hem and upper corner to give it enough tension to also smock nicely. That's what I did, and it worked out really well, and it looks pretty nice and neat. And then you just go ahead and smock the whole piece like there's no tomorrow. It's gonna take some time, but it's gonna be worth it, because then you will have a base to work with. And this is my finished smocked piece. So as you can see, it shrunk down quite a bit, and this is exactly the measurement that I need for my underbust circumference, which is my horizontal measurement. Before continuing on though, I cut out my bust pattern piece twice, and one time is gonna be my lining for that, which will be gathered to the measurement that I took before from strap to strap, if you remember, with an elastic. In my case, that elastic measures about 25 centimeters. So the distance between the straps that you measured before is the maximum it can actually measure, because it is an elastic. So when it is fully relaxed, I guess, it should not be more than 30 centimeters or whatever your measurement between the straps is. So I stitched it on while stretching it, and also backstitched the seam allowance onto the lining piece so it would lay nicely. Closed the remaining upper corner while inserting some elastics for the straps, and stitched the remaining raw edges together so it's one piece to work with. Okay, now we still have a little bit of calculation to do, because in my triage piece I really didn't like how the side seam went so much to the back, so I tried my best this time to avoid that. And what I did for that was actually calculating the front piece, which I did with the numbers that I measured before, because I measured from my side seam to my side seam over the back, which was in my case 50 centimeters, and the front was 25 centimeters. So I knew that the back was 66% of my whole circumference, and I translated that into my piece right here. So I basically just marked my side seam with the pins right there, which is at 66%, which is my back. I also went ahead and marked my center front, because that also gets important in just a second, and drew a horizontal line at around 5 centimeters. I think I did 6 centimeters lower than my upper corner, because that is how wide the sides of my bust piece are. Because the next step is to pin my bust piece onto the front that I just marked. And the best thing is to just have a few points that you can orientate yourself at, which would be the sides and the center back, which is why I pinned the center back on my smocked piece. And I know that it's hard to see now, but I put there is the just pinned bust piece right underneath on the sewing machine. It's just way easier to sew it this way around, because first of all, the bust piece was a tiny bit larger than what I could stretch, and then second of all, because the smocked fabric just tends to fold and you're just gonna sew folds into it. So you better just put the smocked piece on top so you can see it and guide it a bit better, and then just stretch and sew along and put the bust piece onto the smocked base. And while I was at it, I also made the turn of the bust piece and sewed the side seam of the bust piece onto the marked line that I did before, just for it to be complete. I can go ahead now and cut away the smocked area right there that I don't need, because it will be covered by the bust pattern piece, to make it as secure as possible. One thing still to do is actually closing that one side seam that we have, which is just putting the right sides together and pinning it down and then just stitching it down. I also went ahead and overlocked everything to make it as secure as possible. Last thing to do is actually fixing the straps onto the back piece, and then the whole thing is done. And that's it for today's video. As I said before, it was a bit of a confusing video, I guess, a bit different to the other ones that you can see on my channel, as those tend to be more organized, I would say. But nevertheless, it was a fun experience to find my own way or solution of making this top. And I think in the end it turned out really, really well. So if you like this video, please give it a like and comment down below what you would like to see next. Also hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and don't forget to ring the bell to get notified next time I post. I post on Sundays, so you can keep an eye out for that then. I also of course have some videos of me wearing the top, which I'm going to show you in just a second. I just quickly wanted to say, if you haven't already, please follow me on my socials. The handle is the same as here on my YouTube, on every social that I have, and also on my Etsy store if you're interested in any patterns that I have been doing so far on my channel right here. You can find all of them on my Etsy store. Go follow me on Instagram and TikTok. I am sharing lots of behind the scenes of filming and of course my personal life on my Instagram stories specifically, which might be interesting to you, so please go ahead and do that if you haven't already. Thank you guys so much for watching again, and I'm gonna see you next Sunday. Bye guys!